At exactly 3:12 a.m., the lights on the 47th floor of Crossdeck Tower were still on. That alone was unusual. The city outside was asleep, traffic lights blinking yellow, rain streaking down glass like quiet tears. Inside the building, silence ruled, no assistants, no engineers, no executives whispering excuses into phones. Just one man. Ethan Cross, billionaire founder of a tech empire worth billions, stood alone in his office, staring at a wall of red numbers bleeding across his screen. Stock projections collapsing. System alerts firing non-stop. A platform used by millions around the world was minutes from catastrophic failure. If it crashed, it wouldn't just cost money. It would cost trust, jobs, lives built around his technology. Ethan loosened his tie, rubbed his eyes, and let out a breath that sounded more like surrender than exhaustion. His top engineers had already gone home hours ago, leaving him with one final message. "There's nothing more we can do tonight." That was when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Soft, rapid, rhythmic. Typing. Ethan froze. The floor was supposed to be empty. Security logs showed no authorized staff. His mind jumped instantly to worst-case scenarios: a breach, a hacker, sabotage from a competitor who smelled blood. He stepped out of his office. The hallway lights were dimmed to night mode. Cleaning carts sat parked against the walls. The hum of servers echoed faintly. Then, at the far end of the corridor, he saw her. A woman in a navy blue janitor's uniform. Dark skin, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. She was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, a small laptop balanced on her knees. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence, fast, deliberate, fearless. Lines of code streamed across the screen. Error messages disappeared, systems stabilized. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't copying. She was building. Fixing something his best-paid minds couldn't. He took a step closer. The floor creaked slightly. She didn't look up. Completely locked in. Completely unseen. And in that moment, watching a black cleaner quietly rewrite the future of his collapsing company at 3 in the morning, Ethan Cross realized something chilling. The person who might save everything he built was the same person his company never believed was worth seeing. What he didn't know would change everything. Long before anyone noticed her, Aaliyah Brooks had learned how to disappear. She moved quietly through Crossdeck Tower every night, her footsteps soft against marble floors polished to reflect power and money. The security guards barely glanced up when she passed. The late-working executives stepped aside without really seeing her, their conversations uninterrupted, their eyes trained forward, as if she were part of the building itself. Invisible labor had a rhythm. Empty trash cans, sanitized desks, coffee rings wiped from glass conference tables where decisions were made that shaped millions of lives. Every night, Aaliyah cleaned the same rooms where people debated innovation, ethics, and the future, never once realizing the future was scrubbing fingerprints off their screens. She didn't resent the work. What hurt was how familiar the silence felt. Aaliyah was 28, sharp-eyed, observant. She listened more than she spoke, not because she lacked confidence, but because experience had taught her that when she spoke too soon, people stopped listening altogether. Once, years ago, she had been loud with her brilliance. She remembered the acceptance email to a top computer science program, her mother crying at the kitchen table, professors who praised her logic but stumbled over her name, the internship where her algorithm was praised in meetings, then presented under someone else's name. She remembered the moment she realized talent wasn't enough. When her mother got sick, everything collapsed at once. Tuition bills, medical debt, promises that never came through. Aaliyah dropped out quietly, telling herself it was temporary, that she would return. Life had other plans. Now she cleaned the headquarters of one of the largest tech companies in the world, the same industry that once told her she was too aggressive, too quiet, not the right fit, depending on the day. But Aaliyah never stopped coding. She studied broken systems the way other people studied scars. She noticed inefficiencies, ethical blind spots, patterns of exploitation buried deep in elegant interfaces. At night, when the building slept, she sat in corners with her old laptop fixing problems no one asked her to solve. Not for praise. Not for money, but because broken systems bothered her. On the top floor of that same tower lived a very different kind of loneliness. Ethan Cross had everything the world said mattered. A billionaire before 40, magazine covers, standing ovations at conferences, a reputation as a visionary who changed the game. But lately, the game was slipping from his control. Crosstech had grown too fast. Layers of management insulated him from reality. Every meeting felt rehearsed. Every report softened. Problems arrived only after they'd metastasized. Ethan sat in his glass-walled office most nights, staring out over the city he supposedly ruled, feeling strangely powerless. He told himself exhaustion was the reason. But deep down, something else gnawed at him. His company talked endlessly about innovation, inclusion, and disruption, but the same voices dominated every room. The same faces approved every idea. Anyone who challenged the system was labeled difficult, emotional, or not aligned with company culture. Ethan hadn't designed it that way, but he had allowed it. And now the cracks were showing. A core platform, one responsible for data handling across multiple products, was malfunctioning. Engineers proposed temporary patches. Executives insisted on silence to avoid public panic. No one addressed the fundamental flaw. The system was built to prioritize speed and profit over stability and ethics. Ethan felt it in his gut. This wasn't just a technical issue. It was a moral one. Yet every time he raised concerns, he was reassured. We've got it handled. The team is on it. Trust the process. Trust had become the company's most dangerous word. Meanwhile, Aaliyah noticed the warning signs immediately. She saw them reflected in the screens she cleaned, error logs looping endlessly, back-end dashboards flickering, systems straining under invisible weight. She recognized the architecture, and she recognized the problem. It wasn't a bug. It was a design choice, one that would eventually collapse under its own contradictions. She hesitated at first. Who would listen to a cleaner? Who would believe her? She had learned the cost of speaking up too early. So she waited, watched, and when the failures escalated, when she realized people could lose jobs, access, security, she opened her laptop at night and began fixing what she could. Not because she believed she would be thanked, but because walking away would make her complicit. In the same building, two people existed in parallel worlds, separated by glass, titles, and assumptions. One had power but no clarity. The other had clarity but no power. Neither yet understood that their collision was inevitable. And when it came, it wouldn't just challenge a company. It would expose everything they believed about worth, intelligence, and who gets to be heard. The hallway felt longer than it ever had. Ethan Cross stood frozen just outside his office, one hand resting against the cold glass wall, the other clenched loosely at his side. The soft glow from overhead lights cast long shadows across the polished floor, stretching toward the woman sitting calmly at the far end. The cleaner. No, the coder. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her posture was relaxed but alert, back straight against the wall, legs folded, laptop balanced effortlessly. The screen reflected in her focused eyes, cascading lines of code, terminal windows updating in real time, error logs shrinking instead of growing. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't possible. Not because a cleaner couldn't code, he'd learned long ago that intelligence didn't belong to job titles, but because what she was doing, it was advanced, elegant, risk-aware, the kind of problem-solving his lead engineers argued over for weeks. He watched her hands move. There was no hesitation, no trial-and-error panic. She typed like someone who understood the system's soul. A sudden alert chimed softly from her laptop. She paused, frowned slightly, then rewrote 3 lines. The alert disappeared. Ethan swallowed. That alert had been plaguing his engineers for days. He took a step forward. The faint creak of his leather shoe echoed louder than it should have. Aaliyah looked up. For a fraction of a second, her face went completely still. Years of instinct snapped into place. Her shoulders stiffened. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to shut the laptop at the first sign of danger. She recognized him instantly. Everyone did. Ethan Cross, the man whose face hung in the lobby, whose name was etched into awards, whose signature decided careers. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She had always known this moment might come. She just hadn't expected it to feel so quiet. Ethan started, then stopped himself. He realized how ridiculous he must sound barging into a night cleaner's space at 3 in the morning, staring like he'd caught a ghost. "What are you doing?" he finally asked. The question was simple, neutral. But Aaliyah heard everything beneath it. "Why are you here? Who do you think you are? This isn't your place." She closed the laptop halfway, not enough to hide it, but enough to signal caution. "Taking my break," she said evenly. Ethan blinked. That wasn't a lie, not entirely. "At 3 a.m., he said, more to himself than her. She met his gaze now, calm, unapologetic. "Yes, sir." There it was. The sir. He hated it immediately. Ethan gestured gently toward the laptop. "That doesn't look like solitaire." Aaliyah exhaled through her nose. The tiniest sign of irritation slipped through, quickly masked. "No," she said, "it's not." Silence stretched between them. The building hummed softly, servers whispering behind walls. Ethan made a decision. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the screen. Aaliyah hesitated. Every lesson she'd learned screamed at her to say no, to pack up, to disappear. She had survived by staying small. But something in his tone wasn't accusatory. It was unsettled. She tilted the laptop so he could see. Ethan leaned closer. His breath caught. He recognized the architecture instantly. Core platform backend. The very system hemorrhaging stability upstairs. The same one his team claimed was too fragile to modify without weeks of testing. "You're inside our live environment," he said carefully. "Yes," Aaliyah replied. "Read-only access was enough to diagnose it. I mirrored the fix locally." "You mirrored it?" His voice sharpened, not in anger but awe. "That's not documented anywhere." "I know." He straightened slowly. "Where did you learn to do this?" The question landed heavy. Aaliyah looked away for the first time. "School," she said. "What school?" She paused. "Does it matter?" Ethan frowned. "It does to me." She studied his face, searching for mockery, suspicion, superiority. She found none of those things, only exhaustion and something dangerously close to curiosity. "State University," she said. "Computer science before I dropped out." "Why?" She met his eyes again. "Because life doesn't pause for potential." The words hit harder than she intended. Ethan nodded slowly. He felt them settle somewhere uncomfortable in his chest. "And this fix," he said, gesturing back to the code, "what does it do?" Aaliyah reopened the laptop fully. "It reroutes how your system prioritizes real-time data calls. Right now, it's overloading because it treats high-frequency monetized actions as critical. That's why it keeps crashing under peak demand." "That's exactly what our team said," Ethan replied. "Yes," she said calmly, "but that's not the root problem." She scrolled. "You built this to extract as much as possible, as fast as possible. You ignored long-term integrity, so now the system is eating itself." Ethan stared. No one spoke to him like that. "No one. And you can fix it?" he asked quietly. "I already did," she said, "at least the first layer." He looked back at the screen. The live metrics she had pulled from public dashboards told a story his internal reports hadn't. Stability curves smoothing, latency improving. This wasn't theory. This was working. "Why?" Ethan asked suddenly. She glanced up, confused. "Why what?" "Why are you doing this?" His voice dropped. "You don't work in engineering, you're not paid for this, you could walk away." Aaliyah's fingers stilled. For a moment the mask slipped. "Because people will get blamed for this," she said softly. "People who didn't design it, people who don't have golden parachutes." Ethan felt something twist inside him. "And because," she continued, quieter now, "I know what it's like to watch something break when you could have stopped it." Silence again. Longer this time. Ethan straightened. "Come upstairs," he said. Her eyes narrowed instantly. "No." "It's not a demand," he replied quickly. I want you to explain this to my executive team. Aaliyah almost laughed. They won't listen, she said. They don't listen to people like me. They'll listen if I tell them to. She shook her head. That's not the same thing. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because she was right. He tried another approach. At least let me have my engineers review your work. Her jaw tightened, so they can take it and erase me. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and earned. Ethan felt exposed. I won't let that happen, he said. Aaliyah searched his face again, this time longer, deeper. You might mean that, she said slowly, but systems don't run on intentions. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression shifted. My break's over, she said, closing the laptop. Ethan panicked slightly. Wait. She stood, slinging the cleaning cart handle into her grip. I shouldn't have been doing this here, she said, professional again. If you need something cleaned, submit a request. That's not what I... She walked past him. Just like that. Ethan stood there long after she disappeared down the hallway. Alone again. But now something was different. The problem he'd been fighting for weeks wasn't abstract anymore. It had a face, a voice, and a truth he could no longer ignore. Upstairs, alarms began chiming again, louder this time. And Ethan Cross realized, with chilling clarity, that if he didn't act fast, the next confrontation wouldn't be quiet at all. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He tried, lying on the leather couch in his office, staring at the ceiling where recessed lights hummed faintly. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image. A woman in a cleaner's uniform, sitting on the floor, calmly solving a problem his entire executive team had failed to contain. At 4:11 a.m., his phone buzzed again. Another system alert. Worse than the last. He sat up, heart pounding, and pulled the tablet toward him. The metrics were spiraling now. The temporary patches his engineers had deployed were unraveling under pressure, exactly as Aaliyah had warned. It's eating itself. Her words echoed in his mind. By sunrise, the crisis was no longer theoretical. Customer complaints flooded social media. Internal Slack channels erupted in quiet panic. The PR team drafted statements they hoped would never be released. Ethan stood at the head of the emergency executive meeting later that morning, jaw tight, eyes burning with fatigue. Around the table sat the people who were supposed to have answers. They didn't. Latency spikes are accelerating, the CTO said, tapping a screen nervously. We recommend rolling back features and limiting exposure. That's not a fix, Ethan snapped. That's hiding. The room stiffened. We need time, another executive added, and discretion. Ethan leaned forward slowly. Time is the one thing we don't have. A pause. Then almost casually, he said, there's someone in this building who already solved the core issue. Silence slammed into the room. The CTO frowned. Solved it how? Ethan held their gaze, architecturally. A few executives exchanged looks, skeptical, annoyed. Who? Someone finally asked. Ethan hesitated for just a fraction of a second. A night cleaner. The room reacted instantly. A short laugh, a scoff. Someone cleared their throat like they'd just heard a bad joke. With respect, the CTO said carefully, we're under enough stress already. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest. I saw the code, he said. It works. That's impossible, another executive said flatly. Our systems require years of internal knowledge. So does arrogance, Ethan shot back. The word landed hard. The room shifted. Bring her in, the CTO said after a moment. Let us evaluate what she did. Ethan's jaw tightened. She doesn't work for you. She works here, the executive corrected. No, Ethan said quietly. She cleans here. The distinction made the room uncomfortable. But urgency won. She'll have to answer questions, the CTO said. Security alone. I'll handle it, Ethan said. And if this works, you'll all answer to her. That earned him stunned looks. Aaliyah was halfway through her shift that evening when her supervisor pulled her aside. HR needs to see you, the woman said, not meeting her eyes. Aaliyah's stomach dropped. She nodded calmly, though every instinct told her exactly what this was about. She had crossed a line. In the HR office, the air felt colder, sterile, designed to make people shrink. A woman in a tailored suit smiled politely, hands folded. "There was an incident last night," HR began. "You were observed accessing company systems without authorization." Aaliyah inhaled slowly. "Yes," she said. "That's a serious violation," the woman continued. "Do you understand how dangerous that is?" "Yes," Aaliyah replied. "That's why I fixed the problem instead of exploiting it." The smile faltered. HR exchanged a glance with a security officer standing near the door. "Regardless of intent," HR said, "this could result in immediate termination." The door opened. Ethan walked in. The room froze. HR straightened instantly. "Mr. Cross." "I need to speak with her," Ethan said. "Alone." The officer hesitated, then nodded and stepped out. HR followed reluctantly. When the door closed, silence filled the room. Aaliyah didn't look surprised to see him. "Am I fired?" she asked evenly. Ethan exhaled, "Not yet." She tilted her head. "That's supposed to comfort me." "No," he said honestly. "It's supposed to be the truth." He pulled a chair back but didn't sit. "My team is imploding. Everything you said is happening, faster than predicted." Aaliyah crossed her arms. "Then listen to me this time." "I am," Ethan said, "but I need you to help me explain it to them." She studied him, and what do I get? The question wasn't greedy. It was weary. Ethan answered carefully. Protection, credit, and the chance to fix it the right way. Aaliyah laughed once, short, bitter. "You can't guarantee any of that." "No," he admitted, "but I can put my name behind you publicly." That made her pause. "You'd risk that?" she asked. "I already am," he said, "because the alternative is pretending I didn't see what I saw." Aaliyah looked down at her hands. She thought about every time she'd been asked to prove herself twice as much for half the recognition. Every time she'd been told to wait, to be patient, to let others speak first. She thought about the people who would suffer if the system collapsed. "Fine," she said at last, "but I don't do this quietly." Ethan nodded. "Good." The conference room was packed. Executives, legal, engineering leads, everyone tense. When Aaliyah walked in, wearing her cleaning uniform because no one had offered her another option, the room went silent. Eyes tracked her, assumptions hardened instantly. She felt them, but she didn't flinch. Ethan stood beside her. "This is Aaliyah Brooks," he said clearly. "She identified and resolved the core instability in our platform." A murmur rippled through the room. The CTO crossed his arms. "We'd like to see the solution." Aaliyah stepped forward without waiting for permission. She connected her laptop to the screen. No theatrics, just clarity. She walked them through the system's failure points, the ethical shortcuts baked into the architecture, the long-term consequences no one had wanted to name. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't apologize. She spoke with precision. Some executives grew defensive, others grew quiet. When she finished, the room was heavy with something no one wanted to say out loud. She was right. One executive finally spoke. "Why wasn't this caught earlier?" Aaliyah didn't hesitate. "Because no one was looking for it. You were looking at profits, not people." The words hit like a slap. Ethan watched faces shift, from dismissal to discomfort to realization. This wasn't just a technical reckoning. It was moral exposure. After the meeting, when the room finally emptied, Aaliyah unplugged her laptop. "Now what?" she asked Ethan. He met her gaze. "Now we decide whether this company deserves to survive." For the first time since the crisis began, Aaliyah allowed herself a small, tired smile. Because the confrontation she'd feared for years had finally arrived. And this time she hadn't been erased. The building felt different after that meeting. Not louder, not quieter. Sharper. Aaliyah sensed it the moment she stepped back onto the executive floor the following evening. Conversations stopped a beat too late. Eyes lingered a beat too long. The air itself seemed to question her presence, as if the walls were recalibrating to include someone they were never designed to hold. She was no longer invisible. But she wasn't welcome either. Ethan noticed it too. From his office, he watched through the glass as senior managers clustered together, whispering behind hands, glancing toward Aaliyah's temporary workstation, a desk hastily arranged near the engineering bullpen. It wasn't symbolic inclusion. It was containment. "Let's keep her close," legal had suggested earlier. "Controlled," another executive added. Ethan had said nothing then. Silence had been easier than confrontation. Now watching Aaliyah sit alone, shoulders squared, typing steadily while the room subtly rejected her, that silence weighed heavier. The first real resistance came disguised as procedure. An email from compliance arrived before noon, copied to half the leadership team. It outlined concerns about unauthorized system access, liability exposure, and intellectual property ownership. The tone was polite, clinical, sharp enough to cut without drawing blood. Aaliyah read it twice, then once more. She closed her laptop slowly. This was the part she knew too well. Not open hostility, but erosion. Death by 1,000 policies. She walked into Ethan's office without knocking. He looked up surprised, but not annoyed. "They're setting me up," she said plainly, placing the printed email on his desk. Ethan read it, his jaw tightened. "They're protecting the company," he said automatically. Aaliyah didn't raise her voice. "No, they're protecting themselves." He looked at her then, really looked. "You knew this would happen," he said. "Yes," she replied. "That's why I didn't want to come upstairs." The words weren't bitter, just factual. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his temple. "We'll push through it." Aaliyah shook her head. "That's not how systems like this work. They don't break all at once. They exhaust you until you walk away." She picked up the email again. "They're going to question my credentials, my intent, my tone, and when that doesn't work, they'll say I'm a risk." Ethan exhaled. "You're not." "That won't matter," she said. "Truth never matters as much as comfort." The room fell quiet. Outside, engineers walked past, pretending not to stare. The pressure escalated quickly. Aaliyah's fixes worked, but only when they were allowed through. Every solution she proposed had to pass through layers of approval, where it slowed, warped, or disappeared entirely. By the time changes reached production, they were diluted versions of her original intent. And when problems persisted, fingers pointed subtly in her direction. She said this would stabilize things. Maybe the approach was too theoretical. Perhaps she doesn't understand scale. Each comment landed softly, but together they formed a narrative. Ethan found himself pulled into constant meetings, legal warnings, PR strategies, board members calling at odd hours, reminding him of fiduciary duty. "She's a liability," one board member said calmly over the phone. "You're emotionally compromised." Ethan stared out at the city while listening. "No," he replied slowly, "I'm finally paying attention." That answer didn't satisfy them. At night, long after the building emptied, Aaliyah remained. She worked through simulations, mapping out long-term consequences no one wanted to fund because they wouldn't show immediate profit. She documented everything, painstakingly, knowing that memory was fragile but records endured. Sometimes Ethan joined her quietly, sitting across the room watching her work. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. One night around 2 a.m., Ethan broke the silence. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked. Aaliyah didn't look up. "Leave what?" "This place, this industry, after what happened to you." She paused. "I did leave," she said. "For a while, but broken systems follow you, just different names, same outcomes." She finally met his gaze. "And because walking away doesn't stop harm, it just makes it quieter." Ethan nodded slowly. That was the moment he realized something uncomfortable. She wasn't there to be saved. She was there to hold the line. The breaking point came disguised as an opportunity. An emergency board review was scheduled, ostensibly to evaluate progress. Aaliyah was informed she could attend, but only as an observer. No speaking unless addressed. No independent presentation. Ethan knew what that meant. Control the narrative. The boardroom was immaculate, polished wood, soft lighting, authority carefully curated. Aaliyah sat at the far end, hands folded, posture composed. Her cleaning uniform had been replaced with borrowed business attire, still slightly ill-fitting, still not quite allowed. As executives presented selective data, Ethan watched carefully. They showed short-term improvements, carefully omitted long-term projections, praised team effort without names. When one board member asked about the original architectural concern, the CTO answered smoothly. "We're managing risk through iterative mitigation." Aaliyah inhaled. Ethan felt it. She raised her hand. The room stilled. The CTO glanced at Ethan. "Is this appropriate?" Ethan hesitated. Aaliyah's eyes stayed forward, calm, steady. "This is why we're here," Ethan said finally. The CTO's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Aaliyah spoke. Not emotionally. Not defensively. She laid out what hadn't been shown, the delayed failures, the ethical exposure, the long-term costs that would surface after the board had already congratulated itself. The room grew tense. One board member frowned. Why wasn't this included in the report? Silence. Another asked, "Are you saying the current plan will fail?" "Yes," Aaliyah said, "just not immediately, which makes it more dangerous." The word dangerous lingered. After the meeting, executives were furious. "You blindsided us," the CTO hissed in the hallway. "No," Aaliyah replied evenly. "I told the truth." "You overstepped. You underlistened." Ethan watched the exchange, heart pounding. He realized this was no longer about code. It was about power. Who gets to speak? And who pays the price for honesty? Later that night, alone in his office, Ethan stared at his reflection in the glass. He thought about all the times he'd chosen stability over justice, image over disruption, comfort over courage. And he understood the rising truth with painful clarity. Saving the company would cost him something, and protecting Aaliyah would cost him even more. Down the hall, Aaliyah packed up her laptop, unaware of the next move already forming against her. The system was pushing back. Harder now. And the real test of loyalty, integrity, and courage had only just begun. The retaliation didn't arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, dressed as concern. By the next morning, Aaliyah's temporary access badge stopped working on half the doors it had opened the day before. The engineering floor, the secure testing lab, even the break room near her workstation. Each denial blinked red, small and humiliating, forcing her to reroute through longer paths while eyes followed her movement. No announcement, no explanation. Just friction. She didn't mention it to Ethan at first. She already knew how this played out. Systems didn't expel you all at once. They made your presence exhausting until leaving felt like relief. Meanwhile, a revised internal memo circulated company-wide. It praised cross-department collaboration and innovative problem-solving, while deliberately avoiding her name. Her contributions were reframed as insights surfaced during internal review, her role reduced to background noise. Engineers who had watched her dismantle the problem firsthand now spoke carefully around her. "Legal's watching," one whispered apologetically. Another avoided eye contact entirely. At lunch, she sat alone. Not because no one liked her, but because proximity now carried risk. Aaliyah felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the old wound reopening, the unspoken message pressing down from all sides. "You were useful, now you're inconvenient." That afternoon, Ethan received a call from the board chair. The tone was cordial, almost friendly. "We're concerned about optics," the chair said. "This narrative you're allowing, it's destabilizing confidence." "What narrative?" Ethan asked flatly. "That a janitor fixed what our engineers couldn't," the chair replied. "It undermines trust in leadership." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "It reinforces trust in truth," he said. A pause. "Be careful," the chair warned. "Martyrdom isn't leadership." The line went dead. Ethan sat back, heart pounding. He knew what that meant. Pressure was shifting upward now. That evening, Aaliyah was called into a smaller meeting room by legal. This time, no smiles. A thick folder sat on the table. Given recent events, the lead counsel began, we need to formalize boundaries. Aaliyah listened silently. They outlined a temporary consulting agreement. Limited scope, strict non-disclosure, no public attribution, no future claims to intellectual property. In exchange, she would receive a modest one-time payment. Sign this, the lawyer said, sliding the document forward, and this situation resolves cleanly. Aaliyah stared at the folder. Resolve cleanly, meaning she would disappear again, this time legally. She looked up, and if I do... The lawyer's smile thinned. Then we revisit the security violation. There it was. The quiet threat. Aaliyah stood slowly. I didn't come here for money, she said, and I won't sign away the truth to protect your embarrassment. The lawyer sighed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, Aaliyah replied calmly. You already did that. She walked out. When Ethan heard about it, his reaction surprised even himself. He was furious. Not loud fury, but sharp, controlled anger that cut deeper. He called an emergency leadership session that night. When they gathered, tension coiled thickly around the table. You tried to silence her, Ethan said without preamble. Legal adjusted their glasses. We tried to protect the company. No, Ethan said. You tried to erase accountability. The CTO leaned forward. You're risking everything for one person. Ethan met his gaze. No, I'm risking everything to stop this company from lying to itself. Silence followed. Then the CTO spoke carefully. If you continue down this path, the board will intervene. Ethan nodded, then let them. That was the moment lines hardened. Outside the boardroom, Aaliyah sat alone again, unaware of how fiercely the fight around her had become. She focused on her work, mapping failure chains, documenting ethical exposure, preparing contingency plans no one had authorized her to build. She worked because that was the only place her fear quieted. Late that night, Ethan joined her. You don't have to stay, he said. She didn't look up, neither do you. He smiled faintly at that. They offered you a deal, he said. She nodded, a muzzle. I told them no more games. She finally turned to him. You realize they'll come for you next. They already have. Aaliyah studied his face. For the first time, she saw uncertainty there, not about the company, but about himself. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. Ethan considered the question. Because if I let them silence you, he said slowly, then everything I built is already rotten. I just refuse to smell it. Aaliyah absorbed that quietly. Then she said, if this goes public, they'll paint me as the problem. I know. They'll say I hacked you, manipulated you. I know. And you'll lose control of your own company. Ethan didn't hesitate. Then it wasn't mine to begin with. That answer landed heavier than any promise. The crisis escalated overnight. A journalist reached out with questions about internal instability. A regulator requested documentation related to data handling. Rumors leaked, carefully shaped, strategically vague. Someone wanted this buried. Ethan realized they were out of time. He made a decision that would define everything after. He scheduled a full internal town hall. Mandatory attendance. No filters. No intermediaries. When the announcement went out, panic rippled through leadership. You can't do this, PR insisted. This will fracture confidence. Ethan replied simply, so did lying. The auditorium filled quickly the next day. Engineers, support staff, custodians, people who had never been invited into the same room before. Aaliyah sat in the front row, hands folded, heart steady but heavy. Ethan took the stage. He spoke about the system failure, not as a glitch but as a consequence. About choices made under pressure, about voices ignored. Then he gestured toward Aaliyah. This company nearly collapsed, he said, because we confused titles with truth. Murmurs spread. Aaliyah Brooks identified the flaw we missed. She fixed what we refused to face. A hush fell. He continued, and the way we treated her afterward, that is the real crisis. Some faces reddened, others looked down. Aaliyah felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she kept her composure. Ethan finished with words that would echo far beyond the room. "If brilliance must wear the right uniform to be believed," he said, "then we don't deserve to lead." The room erupted, not in applause but in something deeper. Recognition. Afterward, the fallout was immediate. The board called for an emergency vote. Executives resigned preemptively. Media inquiries multiplied. And Aaliyah stood at the center of a storm she never asked to enter. That night, alone again in the quiet building, she looked out at the city. For years, she had carried the weight of being unseen. Now the weight was being seen and knowing the cost. Behind her, footsteps approached. Ethan stopped beside her. "This is the point of no return," he said. Aaliyah nodded, "For both of us." Neither spoke again. Because they both understood now. The rising action wasn't just about saving a company. It was about deciding who would be broken when the truth finally refused to stay buried. The vote was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. That was how quietly it was supposed to end. No press conference, no announcement to staff, just a closed-door board session where 12 people would decide whether Ethan Cross remained CEO of the company he built, or whether stability would be restored by removing the problem at its source. The problem, as they framed it, wasn't the broken system. It was the man who refused to look away. Ethan stood alone in his office as the sun rose over the city, pale light spilling through the glass walls. His phone buzzed continuously, messages from advisors, warnings from legal, missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He ignored them all. On his desk lay 2 documents. One was a resignation letter, already drafted by the board's legal counsel for his convenience. Polite language, grateful tone, an easy exit that would protect his reputation and secure his wealth. The other was a folder Aaliyah had given him at 2:17 a.m. Inside it was everything. Technical documentation, internal emails, decision logs showing how executives knowingly deprioritized safety and ethics for speed and profit. Projections that proved the system would fail again, worse next time, if left unchanged. And most damning of all, evidence that some leaders had known about the flaw years earlier and buried it. Ethan closed the folder slowly. He thought about his father, a machinist who taught him that if something breaks, you fix it properly, or you don't fix it at all. He thought about Aaliyah, sitting alone for years with solutions no one wanted because they came from the wrong mouth. At 8:58 a.m., his assistant knocked. "They're ready," she said quietly. Ethan stood. The boardroom was colder than usual. Not physically, but emotionally. 12 faces stared back at him, some guarded, some irritated, some already resigned to the outcome. The chair sat at the head of the table, hands folded, expression unreadable. "This meeting will be brief," the chair began. "Given recent disruptions, the board has lost confidence in your ability to lead objectively." Ethan didn't sit. "Before you vote," he said evenly, "there's something you need to see." The chair frowned. "This is not the time." "It's the only time," Ethan interrupted. He placed Aaliyah's folder on the table and slid it forward. "What's this?" someone asked. "The truth," Ethan replied. They skimmed at first, then slower, then with visible discomfort. One board member stiffened. "These emails." "Prove you knew," Ethan said, "or chose not to ask." The chair's voice hardened. "Are you accusing this board of misconduct?" "I'm accusing this company of lying," Ethan said calmly, "and I'm done helping it do that." Silence crashed into the room. "You've lost perspective," another board member snapped. "You're protecting an employee who violated security." Ethan's eyes sharpened. "She protected your customers when you wouldn't." "This is emotional," the chair said, "unprofessional." Ethan let out a slow breath. "No," he said. "What's unprofessional is hiding failure until it explodes." The chair leaned back. "Enough, the vote will proceed." Ethan looked around the room. "Before you vote," he said one last time, "you should know this meeting is being recorded." The room froze. "What?" someone whispered. Ethan continued evenly. along with copies of that folder already delivered to regulators. The chair's face drained of color. "You did what?" they demanded. "I told the truth," Ethan replied. "The same one you tried to bury." Chaos erupted. "This is extortion. You can't do this. You'll destroy the company." Ethan raised his voice, not loud but steady. "No," he said, "I'll destroy the lie. What happens next is up to you." Downstairs in the auditorium, hundreds of employees sat in stunned silence as the internal live stream cut in unexpectedly. No announcement. No introduction. Just the boardroom feed. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they realized what they were watching. A coup. A reckoning. Aaliyah stood near the back, arms crossed, heart pounding as she recognized the room, the table, the faces. She hadn't known Ethan would do this. She hadn't asked him to. And suddenly, the weight of it pressed hard against her chest. On screen, the chair demanded the feed be cut. Ethan refused. "If this company is worth saving," he said into the mic, "it can survive being honest with itself." The live stream continued. Employees leaned forward, some covered their mouths, others felt something unfamiliar bloom in their chests, validation. For the first time, leadership wasn't speaking in slogans. They were exposed. The climax came not with shouting, but with a question. A junior board member, quiet until now, cleared her throat. "Why was she never hired?" she asked. The room stilled. "Who?" the chair snapped. "The woman who found the flaw," the board member said. "Why was someone with that level of understanding cleaning our floors?" No one answered. Because the answer was obvious. And ugly. Ethan spoke into the silence. "Because we don't just build systems," he said. "We build gates, and then we pretend they're merit-based." The chair stood abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned." Ethan shook his head. "No, this is accountability." He turned to the camera. "To everyone watching, this is what leadership looks like when it forgets who it serves." Security appeared at the doors. Aaliyah's stomach dropped. She watched as guards approached Ethan. But before they could reach him, something unexpected happened. The junior board member stood. Then another's. Then another's. "I won't vote to remove him," one said quietly. "Neither will I," another added. The chair looked around, stunned. "You're making a mistake," they warned. "No," the junior member said. "We're correcting one." The vote proceeded anyway. The final count hung in the air. 6 votes to remove Ethan. 6 votes to keep him. A tie. All eyes turned to the chair. As chair, they held the deciding vote. They looked at Ethan. At the screens. At the hundreds of employees watching live. At the truth that refused to stay hidden. The chair swallowed. "I abstain," they said hoarsely. The room exploded. The vote failed. Ethan remained CEO. But the victory was fragile and temporary. Because the story was already out. Within hours, headlines broke. Tech giant faces ethical reckoning. CEO exposes internal cover-up. Cleaner turned coder saves failing system. Aaliyah's name was everywhere. And so were the lies. Anonymous sources painted her as a rogue actor, a hacker, a plant, a distraction. Reporters camped outside her apartment. Her phone rang endlessly. She felt the old fear clawing back, the cost of being visible. Ethan called her that night. "I won't let them rewrite this," he said. "They already are," Aaliyah replied softly. "But they won't erase you," Ethan said. "Not this time." The final blow came from the executives who resigned. In a coordinated move, they released a statement accusing Ethan of manipulation and Aaliyah of misconduct. They threatened lawsuits. They threatened silence. They threatened to drag everything into years of legal mud. Ethan read the statement, then did something no one expected. He went live again. This time alone. No board, no script. Just him, the camera, and the truth. "I built this company," he said, "and I failed it by trusting comfort over courage." He named names. He cited documents. He credited Aaliyah directly, clearly, publicly, unmistakably. She saved this company, he said, not because it rewarded her, but because it didn't deserve to fail quietly. The clip went viral. Public support surged. Regulators accelerated investigations. The executives' legal threats collapsed under scrutiny. And the narrative shifted. Late that night, after the chaos settled into a stunned quiet, Aaliyah stood once more on the executive floor. The same place she'd once cleaned unseen. Now empty. Ethan joined her. "You okay?" he asked. She considered the question. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm still standing." He nodded. "That's enough for tonight." They looked out over the city together. Lights blinking. Systems humming. Truth exposed. For the first time, the future wasn't certain. But it was real. And in that moment, when power bent, truth held, and dignity refused to disappear, the story turned. Not because justice was complete, but because it had finally begun. The aftermath didn't feel like victory. It felt like debris settling after a storm. Crossdeck didn't collapse, but it didn't return to normal either. Normal had been exposed as fragile, selective, and deeply dishonest. The company entered a strange in-between state, suspended between what it had been and what it was now forced to become. For the first time in its history, silence wasn't used to protect power. It was used to listen. In the days following the board vote and the public reckoning, regulators moved swiftly. Audits expanded. Policies were frozen. Several executives who had resigned were formally named in investigations. Their carefully worded denials dissolved under documents Aaliyah had meticulously prepared long before anyone believed they would matter. The system flaw, the one nearly buried, was fully rebuilt, not patched, not softened. Rebuilt, this time with integrity at the center. Aaliyah led the effort, though she never framed it that way. Her role was formalized after weeks of negotiation, not as a symbolic hire, but as principal systems architect, with full authority and a mandate written directly into company governance. She insisted on one condition before signing: that the offer letter list not only salary and title, but structural commitments. Transparent review pipelines, independent ethics oversight, paid pathways for overlooked talent already inside the building, custodial staff, support teams, interns whose names never made slides. People who already knew how the company really worked. Ethan didn't hesitate. The board hesitated, then agreed. Because the world was watching now, and because, quietly, many employees were waiting to see if the company would finally become what it claimed to be. The media attention faded slower. Aaliyah learned quickly that visibility was its own kind of labor. Interviews requested, panels offered, think pieces written about her brilliance, her calm, her restraint. Some framed her as a hero. Others framed her as a disruption. Both missed the point. She declined most invitations. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. She didn't want to become a symbol people applauded and then ignored. She wanted systems that changed even when no one was clapping. On her first official day in her new role, Aaliyah arrived early. Earlier than anyone expected. She stood in the lobby watching people stream past her. Engineers, executives, assistants, many of whom did double takes when they recognized her. Some smiled awkwardly. Some nodded with genuine respect. Some looked away, unsure how to reconcile who she had been to them with who she was now. Aaliyah didn't take it personally. She knew transitions were uncomfortable. That was how you knew they mattered. She rode the elevator to the executive floor, not as a visitor this time, but with full access. The doors opened to a space that once felt forbidden. Now it felt unfinished. That was okay. She preferred unfinished to fake. Her office was modest, no corner view, no excessive glass. She asked for whiteboards instead. Lots of them. Ethan's world changed too, but not in the ways the headlines predicted. He kept his position, but his authority was no longer unquestioned. The board remained fractured, trust, once broken, rebuilt slowly. And Ethan welcomed that. For the first time since founding the company, he felt accountable not just upward, but outward. He spent less time on stages and more time in rooms he'd never entered before. Support centers, maintenance floors, quiet corners where people spoke honestly because they never expected to be heard. Sometimes Aaliyah joined him. Sometimes she didn't. They didn't need to be seen together to know they were aligned. One evening, weeks after the chaos, Ethan found Aaliyah still working late. Again, different reason now. She was reviewing a proposal from a junior engineer, one she'd personally encouraged to submit. "You could go home," Ethan said gently. Aaliyah smiled faintly. "I will, I just want to finish this." He leaned against the doorframe. "You know they listen to you now." She nodded. "That's why I'm careful." He understood. Power once granted could be just as dangerous as power denied. The most unexpected change came quietly. A custodial supervisor stopped Aaliyah in the hallway one night. "My niece," the woman said nervously, "she's good with computers, real good, but she doesn't think places like this are for her." Aaliyah smiled. "Tell her they weren't built for her," she said, "but that doesn't mean she doesn't belong." She handed the woman a card. "Have her email me." Word spread. Not fast, but deep. People who had spent years believing brilliance required permission began to imagine something else. Not miracles. Possibility. Months later, CrossTech released its annual report. The numbers were solid, not explosive but sustainable. What stood out wasn't profit. It was transparency. The report included a section titled Lessons Learned. Not marketing language. Not spin. Plain truths. Mistakes named. Systems questioned. Names credited. Aaliyah's name appeared exactly once. Not in bold. Not as spectacle. Just where it belonged. On a quiet evening, long after the press had moved on, Aaliyah returned to the hallway where it all began. The floor where she'd once sat unseen at 3 a.m. The walls looked the same, but they didn't feel the same. She stood there for a moment, remembering the fear, the restraint, the instinct to disappear. Then she turned and walked away, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Ethan watched from a distance, careful not to interrupt. Later, they stood together by the window overlooking the city. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She thought carefully. "No," she said, "but I don't romanticize it either." He nodded. "Me neither." They stood in silence for a while. Not celebratory. Not somber. Just honest. The company wasn't healed. But it was healing. And that mattered. Because the resolution wasn't about applause or punishment. It was about something quieter and far more difficult. Change that stayed. Change that didn't need a headline to survive. Change that made room for people who had always been there. Waiting for the system to finally see them. The true lesson of this story is not about winning an argument, exposing corruption, or rising from the shadows into the spotlight. It is about what systems do to people, and what people can do to systems. Aaliyah was never invisible because she lacked talent. She was invisible because the world around her was built to recognize only certain voices, certain faces, certain paths to brilliance. Her silence was not weakness, it was survival. Her patience was not compliance, it was preparation. This story reminds us that injustice rarely announces itself loudly. More often, it hides in procedures, policies, and that's just how things work. It lives in assumptions that go unchallenged, in comfort that protects itself, and in silence that is mistaken for consent. But silence, when paired with truth, can become power. The moral here is that merit does not fail. Systems fail merit. And when systems fail, the burden should not be on the oppressed to be louder, tougher, or more exceptional just to be seen. The burden belongs to institutions to listen, to question themselves, and to change. Another truth this story teaches is that accountability is not destruction. When Ethan finally listened, truly listened, he didn't lose his company. He lost an illusion, the belief that success earned without scrutiny is harmless. Real leadership begins not when you defend your power, but when you are willing to examine how it was built. The story also challenges the idea of heroes and villains. Progress didn't come from a single speech or a dramatic downfall. It came from uncomfortable conversations, careful rebuilding, and sustained responsibility. Justice here was not revenge, it was repair. Most importantly, the moral message is this: your worth does not depend on being acknowledged by broken systems. And your silence does not mean your truth lacks value. Change doesn't always come from those who shout the loudest. Sometimes it comes from those who endure, observe, prepare, and then speak at the moment when their truth can no longer be ignored. And when that moment comes, the goal isn't to replace one hierarchy with another. It's to build something better, something fairer, something that lasts.